So we've got a couple different causes so far. We've got the stock market collapse. We've got the banks collapsing. That's two things. And now we're going to add another one, which is that so few Americans had all the money. An example of what I'm talking about here is that in 1929, right before the stock market crashed, the top 5% of America, that's just the top 5, they earned 30% of all the wealth. So let's show you what that means. Here we have 100 different people. Let's just pretend we have 100 different people right here, this big block. And here, underneath them, we have $100. 100 people in red, $100 in green. Well, the top 5 richest people, the top 5%, I just colored them in blue, they earn 30% of all the money, which I just colored in blue. That means that all the rest of us, everyone else in pink, has to fight over just those little scraps of green. Well, the problem is, all those little scraps of green, they just got lost by all those banks that collapsed. That's a real problem. So what we have then is that we're not able to buy this money, we're not able to buy these goods because so much money is with just so few people. So we end up doing things like buying on credit. We're not able to keep buying. We have to stop buying. That's a problem. Remember, in supply side economics, people have to buy. But when so few people have so much money, the average person, doesn't have the money to buy stuff. That's a problem. On top of that, if people aren't buying things because they don't have the money, then we're going to see companies beginning to overproduce. Well, wait a minute. So now we have people unable to buy things, and we have banks collapsing, and we have stock market crashing. And now you're telling me that the companies are making too much? That's right, which means that people aren't going to want what they make. This is going to be a disaster. Let me give you an example. Cars. Let's say that Ford Motor Company is making too many cars. People aren't going to want them. Demand will fall. That means sales will decline. Well, if people aren't buying as many cars anymore, maybe because they don't have access to the money, maybe because the banks collapsed, maybe because the stock market collapsed, that means that there's going to be less demand for Ford to buy textiles or oil or steel or rubber or anything else. Well, what happens to the people that make all those textiles for car seats and the oil for gas and the steel and the rubber? What happens to those people who make that? That means that those companies are going to slow down too. Well, they don't need those workers. They don't need to make textiles, oil, and steel anymore. So they're going to cut your wage and they're going to lay you off. Well, if I'm laid off from the company that makes steel or they cut my wage, then I can't afford to buy a new car ever. Which means that Ford will continue to sell fewer cars, which means even less of these things are needed, which means these companies will slow down even more, which means they're going to lower my wages even more and lay off even more people, which means there'll be even fewer automobile sales. You see, here's the trick. In a supply-side economics economy, people must spend. But they can't because too few people had all the money. 5% of the people had 30% of the wealth. They can't because banks lost their money when they collapsed because they loaned it out. People can't spend because the stock market crashed and people lost what they invested. So we are really in trouble now. We're really in trouble because there's no way for us to spend money. It's a real problem.